code. And my guest today is Gina Schaefer, and our topic is going to be ESOPs. Gina owns a whole bunch of hardware stores in Washington, D.C. I think she told me she has 13 of them, which is a ridiculous amount of hardware stores to own, but there you are. And she has recently made 30% of her company an ESOP, and that's what we're going to talk with Gina about today. So let's bring Gina on the show. Hey, Gina, how are you today?
Good morning, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Of
So,
course.
you have 13 hardware stores. I'm assuming that you could have sold them to an outside investor if you wanted to, or
Yeah, I
another.
mean, we evaluated a couple different options, a private equity company, an individual investor, and then settled ultimately on the ESOP.
So, why did you choose an ESOP over the other choices in the first place?
Well, there was a strong impetus during COVID. I live in Washington D.C., and a lot of the protests that were happening in 21 and 22 um, were occurring 20 and 21, I guess, were occurring in front of my office. And my husband and I decided that we really wanted to be part of a solution. And as a small business, what options did we have really to help with generational wealth building and inequities that people were protesting about? And what we ultimately decided on was business ownership was a way to create future wealth for our team. And an ESOP was the way for us to make that happen.
Cool. So,
Yeah.
what process did you actually go through? I mean, looking at an ESOP, I mean, I talk about ESOPs probably at least once a week with somebody, and I think I've done four of them my entire life with clients. So, what was the process you went through as you started educating yourself about A, what an ESOP is, and two, the rules of an ESOP, and three, would it be the right solution for you?
Yeah, so I had two strong mentors at the very beginning. One is Stu Weiss, who owns some hardware stores in Montana. He had already formed an ESOP. I think his ESOP is about 7 years old at this point. And so I spent a lot of time asking him all kinds of questions. And then there's an organization called the Employee Ownership Exchange Network, which is a network of nonprofits or a nonprofit network across the country whose sole mission is to educate business owners about ESOPs. And so we met with their director, read a lot of things, realized that this was something we could do based on our financials and profitability. And then at that point, we started assembling the team that would help us create the ESOP, which is a consultant who would put together the valuation, a trustee who would be responsible for. I call the trustee my employee's person because he is the person who represents their interests on our board and in all of the valuation that we went through, and we went from there.
So, it seems to be about a fair amount of moving parts that go into an ESOP. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assumption. I used to joke that even my dog had an attorney because my husband and I had an attorney. The business, I think, had an attorney. The trustee had an attorney. There were a lot of components to putting it together.
Yeah, in my experience, an ESOP, if it's done, there's lots of ways of doing ESOPs. And there are promoters out there who will tell you you can do an ESOP where you can be your own trustee and you can run the whole show yourself, and you never really have to share much with your employees. And if you do that, you're likely going to fall on the other side of the Department of Labor's uh, not to do list, and they're likely going to not be very happy with you.
Correct.
But to do an ESOP properly is relatively expensive. How much did you guys end up paying?
I think it was probably about $150,000. I should have that number committed to memory. My husband is our CFO, and so fortunately, he did a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to the valuation process and the fee payments. But you're right. I mean, the Department of Labor heavily regulates ESOPs because there were so many business owners in the past who would create one for the wrong reasons and doing it the wrong way, and so it really needed to be regulated so that the employees who were ultimately left holding the bag were taken care of.
So there's a fair amount of complexity with doing an ESOP. I'm assuming you can handle that amount of complexity because you did one.
Yes. I'm not sure any other way to answer that. Yeah, I think so. Every year we have a valuation now, unlike a publicly traded company where the stock is traded on the stock market and the valuation fluctuates daily. An ESOP gets a valuation once a year, and that um, marks the cost, the value of the share. And so I would say that the complex piece, once you've gone through the process of setting everything up, is that valuation piece every year, which for us now is preceded by an audit. Um, and then the reporting mechanisms that go out to the team.
So you're a 30% ESOP right now, is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And that means the ESOP trust. And just for folks who aren't aware, an ESOP is a qualified retirement plan like a 401k or a profit sharing plan. But instead of having publicly traded stock, the ESOP holds private stock in the company that you're an employee at. And that's a big difference. One of the things that I've found that ESOPs that work well are companies that continue to grow their value. And how much of that went into your decision making process as you were thinking about doing the ESOP?
So I think well, in fact, it's a big factor, right? Excuse me, Josh. You don't want to form an ESOP if you don't think that the future of your business looks bright, because you are extracting the value for the founders, allowing them to get some value out of the equity and time and effort and everything that they've put into building their business. But you want to be able to continue to grow value for the shareholders, which in this case are the employees. And if you don't think that your industry has a runway or that your business has a runway, you're not doing anything that's in the best interest of the team that will be left with the company. So I think for me, I'm always concerned about brick and mortar retail, which is where we are. We do a lot of online transactions, but nothing compared to what we do still as brick and mortar. And so we had to really think about, do we believe in the future of brick and mortar? Do we think that hardware brick and mortar is safer than any other brick and mortar business? And those were all things that we had to take into consideration.
So I'm assuming that the answer to that was yes, you felt it was safer and there was a good future.
Yeah, I'm not a skeptical person at all. This is one place I think where my skepticism tends to rear its ugly head. And the rest of my team was very positive about the outlook. We actually just had our second annual valuation, and the value of the shares went up, which doesn't mean that that's always going to happen, but it was a nice validation in year two, that we were able to increase the share value.
So I assume that at some point you're going to convert your company to 100% ESOP if all things go well.
Yeah, that was the original plan. So, and I mean, it's still the plan. So, when we announced the ESOP 2 years ago, that's when we announced that I would be stepping down as CEO. That I was starting our plan to find my successor. Essentially, I spent about a year and a half in that process, letting the team know on regular intervals where we were in the search process. Ultimately, ended up hiring another Ace hardware store owner. We bought his store and hired him as our CEO. That transaction took longer than it should have expected based on some landlord issues. So that transaction action probably took 7 or 8 months. And then his name's Craig. Craig joined my company as co-CEO. We worked together for about 4 months before I then stepped down.
And you're now the chairman of the or chairperson of the company.
That's what they say. Yes, I am the chair of the board. So the board right now currently consists of the trustee, my husband, and myself as the two main owners still. And we will eventually grow that board to a little bit larger, and particularly once I'm no longer the majority owner, we'll make sure that that structure is in place.
And I assume that when you grow it larger, you're going to bring some outside board members on.
Yeah, so our trustee essentially acts as an internal person, right? Because he's responsible for the trust that represents the employees. But we will bring on an outside shareholder. I'm sorry, an outside board member or two once we've sold a bigger portion.
So one of the things that I really like about ESOPs is what I call the culture of an ESOP. And can you talk a little bit about what's different with your company when you owned it 100% privately and what's changed since you become an ESOP?
So people think that ESOPs automatically make the team believe or act differently, and meaning they automatically understand that their output creates more value for themselves specifically. We always had a 401k that we matched. We always had a profit sharing. component to our business. And so we had a lot of things in place that brick and mortar retail either doesn't or can't. And so I feel like we had that mentality to some extent. Now, you're also usually recommended not to form an ESOP if you don't already have a strong culture. And we had a very strong culture. So now the switch that's flipped gives us a chance to really call the employees owners because they are, and to hopefully infuse more of that culture of the more we work, the more we make. Even though we had some mechanisms to do that before, it's a big difference. And so I think it's an ongoing learning process. I've been writing a little bit about it on LinkedIn, the challenges that have arisen, just the misunderstandings that occur. It's a fairly complicated um, mechanism to understand, even though we say, well, Josh, it's a qualified retirement plan. If this is your first job, you probably don't understand what a qualified retirement plan is. And so it's not just educating them on what that is. Then you layer on top the fact that, oh, by the way, we're going to call you an owner, but that doesn't make you a manager. Um, it's fun. I mean, there's a pretty big learning curve that's really exciting to work through.
One of the things which I think is, I mean, I'm a big fan of open book management, whether you have an ESOP or you don't have an ESOP. I have found that companies that share their numbers outperform peers in the industry by a wide, wide margin. I could actually argue that that's more important than the growth and value than an ESOP structure is in growth and value, as long as you put compensation behind that. We
Yep.
did that in our food service company when I did that, and I found that the more information we shared, the better results we got. Has that been your experience?
Yeah. People don't know what goals to hit if they don't know what the goals are or what the numbers last year were. And so we are very transparent when it comes to the cost of goods, the shrinkage, the amount of dollars we lose via shoplifting. The one place where we've always been hesitant's not the right word. Our occupancy costs are enormous. And we've never wanted to stress anybody out, particularly the managers, when it comes to the fact that some of those bills are overwhelming. Um, Case in point, the store where my office is, the rent on that store is $50,000 a month. That is so far beyond most people's comprehension that I would say that yes, we have been very open book with a little bit of a probably big brother attitude, and that we don't want anyone to stress about $50,000 a month in rent. So, yeah.
So, as a percent of your sales, what is that?
Um, that particular store, I think we've gotten it down to 12%.
Okay, well, that's not terribly horrible for a
No,
retail operation.
no. Well, it's a very successful business. And so
Yes.
that location in
This
particular,
is the issue which I always recommend to people. The dollars are irrelevant. It's the percents that count.
yeah, for sure.
And that's teaching. I mean, one of the things that I see with successful ESOPs, they have an ongoing full court press of teaching their team members how to read financial statements, or at least understand what a financial statement is, and the fact that there's a lot of expenses. And I go back, I
Yeah,
tell the story all the time. I was working with a client on the West Coast, and he made a lot of money in dollars. And I said, you really need to share your information here because I'm going to bet all your employees think you make a lot more money than you do.
right.
He said, I can't do that because they'll know what I make. I said,
No,
okay.
yeah,
I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We stopped the first three people that walked by his office. I said, Greg does $6 million a year in sales. How much do you think he keeps in profit? He puts in his pocket at the end of the year.
5 million.
Well, it's 40 to 60% were the answers.
Right, right,
And the truth was he made 5%.
right.
So my attitude towards that is we need to share our numbers to give our team members reality of what it costs for a business to run.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think all in our rent is $4 or $5 million a year. Um, and that's just rent. That doesn't include occupancy and healthcare and all the other things that we add in. So we share those numbers with, like I said, the caveat that for years we didn't want to stress anybody out, but we do recognize that it needs to be explained. particularly when it comes to the cost of goods, because the last couple of years, all everyone wants to talk about in the media is that everything's gotten so much more expensive. Um, we have to raise our prices in some cases to keep up with our costs. And if our team just thinks we're raising prices arbitrarily, you lose that educational moment to explain costs have gone up from the vendor. This is another factor. All the other expenses that we have also go up. Yeah, it's a lot of work. Why can't this be easy?
Well, that's a really good question, but I would expect you find it relatively satisfying work.
I think it's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, we have about 300 teammates now, and every single one of them I think is just incredible.
So I'm assuming that right now you're a regular C corporation, am I correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm also going to assume that if and when you become 100% ESOP, you're going to convert to an S corporation.
Correct. Yes.
And why might you want to do that?
You're gonna have to ask my husband those questions because I do not know. I'm assuming it has
Okay.
to do with
Why
tax implications.
I can tell you why.
Go for it.
The reason that you do that, and this is a really cool thing about ESOPs, is there's only one business organizational type that you can run where you don't pay income taxes. And that's a fully owned 100% ESOP that has over 25 employees as corporation ESOP. And the reason is, and this gets a little bit technical, so bear with me for a minute. S corporations are what's called pass-throughs, meaning that the owner pays the taxes at their individual level.
Right.
And the ESOP, which is a trust, is a tax-free trust. And if 100% of the stock in an S corporation is owned by an ESOP, and it's one of the exceptions for S corporation rules, there is no income taxes paid. And here's where the real advantage in that becomes for growing a company, especially in your world, Gina. You can now start doing acquisitions tax-free using pre-tax dollars.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
a huge, big deal advantage.
Yeah.
I mean, when you start, and as you bring new people into your organization, you can waive vesting rules and make people coming aboard 100% vested from the day of acquisition if you
Correct.
choose to do so. And it gives you guys, your employees, the opportunity to really continue growing the size of the company, growing the profits, and assumably growing the share value as you go along with that.
We had so many people say, so we're about a $50 million company, so it's fairly substantial for a small business. Several people say, why didn't you sell to private equity or sell it outright? Because the risk of not selling the other 70% that we own it will exist until we can sell it to the ESOP. We were also told that we would have had to have sold it for 20 to 30% higher because of the tax benefits that we've received selling it to the ESOP. Um, I was never going to sell it to private equity unless there was some situation of desperation, I guess. But the tax benefits have been, I know you appreciate that, Josh. The tax benefits are just tremendous. I really hope that I get a chance to talk to lots of other business owners about this mechanism.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you wrote this in some of your information you provided us. Is there's been about 6,000 ESOPs in the country forever, and
Yep.
the number seems to stay about the same and doesn't get any bigger. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is people get into ESOPs, and for a variety of reasons, they need to get out of ESOPs. And I think most of that are the people who do ESOPs for the financial reasons alone. I
Hmm.
see when people do that, and I've been involved in, unfortunately, one that did that. The only reason they formed the ESOP, as it turned out, was it was a way for them to get more money in their pocket.
Yeah.
And 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, we ended up taking it apart because they refused to share the wealth appropriately with all their team members.
This is why the Department of Labor is so important in this transaction.
Well, they didn't really, they were close to the Department of Labor going over the line, but they never really did get over the line. And
Yeah.
they found a buyer. And as you know, with an ESOP, you're required to consider all offers, whether they're you ask for it or you don't. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, I'm seeing ESOPs who are your size and want to make sure private equity can't buy them. They convert to a benefit corporation.
Yeah.
Have you guys thought at all about that?
No, not yet. There's too many other things to think about. It's on a list somewhere to consider for down the road, but yes.
Yeah, and the reason is I'm good friends with the ex-CEO of King Arthur Flour, which is probably the most successful ESOP in Vermont.
Okay.
And he was saying the only reason they become a benefit corporation, because there's a lot of work, was they were getting unsolicited offers for the company. And they
Interesting.
didn't want to have to jump through a lot of hoops trying to justify it. And by becoming a benefit corporation, it's been easy for the trustee and the board to say no thank you to all private equity folks that come and approach them.
How does that factor in? I mean, if the offer is so substantial for the employees, the owners of the company, how does that I don't even know how to ask my question, but I'm guessing you know where I'm going with it. I mean, are you not doing what's in the best interest of the team for the value of the company if that's the reason that you don't sell?
Well, a benefit corporation is also known as a triple bottom line company.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
know what the benefit corporation is, but if the share value that's offered is so substantial for the owners, how do you justify not selling?
Well, there's other factors. I mean, when private equity tends to come in and buy a company, they also have a reputation of taking companies apart.
Right.
And if you're more concerned about having your job long term than getting a bit of a bump in your stock value uh, because someone's offering you a pot of cash, you may decide that, our long-term prospects, we really like being in Vermont. We don't want someone coming here and taking apart what we've done. Our culture is very special. We're a very important part of our community. These are all things that private equity could care less about.
So you only have the ability to use those as deterrents if you're a B Corp. I couldn't say
Well,
that today.
Well, it's not only, let's put it this way, it makes it now you're legally able to do it because the legal
Gotcha.
structure of a benefit corporation, I'm not talking about B Lab certification necessarily, although you do
Mhm.
have to go through that in Vermont if you want to be a benefit corporation. But if you're a benefit corporation, you get to say, this is our rules for how we operate our company, and we're only going to sell under these circumstances, and those circumstances will likely be more non-financial than
Gotcha.
financial.
Gotcha.
And the truth is, if you've done a good job of preparing successor management, which is one of the challenges with ESOPs, your employees will likely do better as an ESOP than they will as selling. Because once that stock is sold, there's no value. And as you've
Right.
probably learning or will learn,
Right.
there's a lot more economic value to owning an operating company than working with the assets after you sold the company,
Right. Right.
which is something that's really important for folks to realize. So it's a really interesting topic. It's one of those things that I think people really, in Vermont, all the big ESOPs have become benefit corporations.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
so in Vermont's sort of a progressive state anyhow,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's a really important thing to realize as you're going through the process. So Gina, unfortunately, we are out of time.
That's way too fast.
Yeah, I know it goes by really quickly. So I know that you're preparing some really kick-ass keynote speeches because I'm working with you. I'm doing that. So how would people find you, and if they want to have you come in and speak about your process, how would they do so?
They can find me on LinkedIn at Gina Schaefer, and I'm assuming my spelling is below my name or will be in the show notes, perhaps. So that's
It will
LinkedIn.
be.
I also have a website. It's ginaschaefer.com or recoveryhardware.com. They go to the same place. Recovery Hardware is the name of the book that I wrote. Um, we happen to hire a lot of folks from the recovery community in Washington, D.C., and so it ended up being a nickname the community gave us. So I look forward to connecting with anybody who's interested in talking about ESOPs or hiring folks in recovery or hardware or any of the above.
And we might have to have you back on and talk about hiring people in recovery because that
Perfect.
would be an interesting topic all by itself.
I would love that.
And I've got two things I would like you to do. The first is I'd like you to please give us an honest rating and review. Wherever you're listening to this ESOP, please go there and give us a review of if you like the show and you love the show, you can give us 5 stars. If you think it's a crummy show, you can give me 1 star and I'll just cry a little bit, but I might even get over it someday. But please give us an honest rating review. It's really, really important. The second thing is, and I've been saying this for a gazillion years now, uh, one of the things I see with most privately held business owners, not Gina's size, but most of the businesses, like 95% of the companies in this country have less than 50 employees. 86% have less than 20 employees. Most of those businesses, the owners may think the business is going to get into retirement. It's not. I hate to give you that bad news. We've developed a program called the Financial Freedom Accelerator, which first helps you figure out where you are on becoming financially free from your business. And if, like most business owners, you find out you need some work, we help you create the strategies that will get you to be financially free from your business. It's really easy to find out more about it. Just go to www.sustainablebusiness.co/freedom, www.sustainablebusiness.co/freedom. Click on the link and read about the Financial Freedom Accelerator. If you find it interesting, click on the link to set up a time to talk with me, and we'll find out if it's right for you. So this is Josh Patrick. We're with Gina Schaefer. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.